Good afternoon. Welcome to today's event, The Political and Economic Outlook for Peru, a conversation with Alfredo Thorn, former Minister of Finance of Peru. For more than 2 decades, despite repeated presidential crises, cabinet turnover, and confrontation between the executive and Congress, Peru has maintained prudent fiscal and monetary policies, low public debt, one of the highest rates of growth in Latin America, and social progress, supported by mining investment and a significant drive of exports and agriculture. Peru achieved sustained growth, reduced poverty, built a reputation for economic credibility and resilience. This record is particularly unusual in Latin America. Just a couple of weeks ago, on February 17, 2026, Congress removed President Jose Jerry from office, continuing the cycle that has produced roughly 8 presidents since 2016. Yet Peru's macroeconomic policy framework has remained largely intact despite this persistent political turmoil. This year, Peru will hold general elections in April 12th, and a second round, if needed, on June 7th. I think there's nobody better to guide us through what has been the secret for Peru to be able to maintain a stable and growing economy throughout periods of political turbulence than Alfredo Thorn. He's a principal director at Thorn and Associates, a Lima-based advisory firm. He was Peru's finance minister from 2016 to 2017. He served as independent director of the Lima Stock Exchange and managing director at the Global Research Department in JP Morgan Chase Bank, where he was responsible for conducting economic research on Mexico and Latin America. Before that, he spent many years as senior economist at the World Bank. Alfredo holds a PhD in economics from Oxford University and a BA from Universidad del Pacífico. So again, Alfredo, thanks for being here. And Alfredo will make a presentation, and after that, we'll have a conversation and we will open it up for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, start sending them through the chat, and I will moderate the discussion once Alfredo's presentation is done. So, Alfredo, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to the university for sponsoring this. I'm going to share a presentation. Here we are. Thank you, all of you, for participating, and I will try to explain what's happening in Peru. It's not easy. First, we're going to talk a little bit of why we have had so many presidents. We had actually 9 presidents in 9 years, when we should have had only 2. Then we're going to talk briefly about the economy. I'm going to hit on the main statistics. Then we are going to talk about fiscal policy. Then we are going to ask the question if there is a divide between the economy and politics. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the central bank. All of you know, as Alex have mentioned, on February, we impeached President Jerry. My sense is that he was well impeached after all what we learned from him. And a new president called Jose Maria Balcázar was elected. The irony of this election is that Jose Maria Balcázar is from the Peru Libre Party, the same party that took Pedro Castillo to the presidency in 2021. So we have had a sort of a full circle from a leftist president to 2 sort of right-wing presidents, and now back again a leftist president. Briefly, President Balcázar tried to put an interesting cabinet. He called Hernando de Soto. All of you know Hernando. Hernando sort of accepted the prime minister position, but in the end, he tried to push for some new members of the cabinet, and the coalition in Congress that supported Balcázar essentially turned Hernando down. And then a new prime minister called Denise Mireles is the one that signed, and she's due to go to Congress now in the middle of March for the non-confidence vote. And there's big questions whether Congress will accept the non-confidence or reject it. No? What is happening in Peru? And I think it's difficult. This is something that I'm writing about in a book. Probably you will see. All of these sort of started, if we have to point down to a certain point in time when the whole thing went sort of wild. I think we have to say that all this started in 2016 when Keiko Fujimori and Pedro Pablo Kuczynski confronted themselves in a runoff election, and Kuczynski won the elections by a very short margin, about 40,000 votes. At that time, Keiko was very upset. She felt that she had been steal the election, that she had won, but what she argued was that the reason was that Humala, the previous president, have prevented the military from voting in that election, which was not entirely true. But then both of them confronted. In her speech acknowledging Kuczynski as the president, Keiko said, I don't know if this was a sort of a threat or a warning, but she said that she will govern from Congress. This was strange because obviously Congress does not govern, it's the executive, the one that is the government. And nobody fully understood what she really meant by that. And then we started seeing one minister after another minister being impeached by Congress. Her political party had a large majority in that Congress, 73 out of 130 Congress members. And then came probably what you would call the Odebrecht scandal. At that time, they essentially found some conflict of interest that Kuczynski had made, and they went for him. And it was not clear how could they do that, because our constitution is like the US Constitution that provides a lot of support, political and judiciary support to the president, and actually sort of ring-fence the president for Congress not being able to impeach him. Yet, Fuerza Popular found a strange article in our constitution that has been in the constitution almost since our independence, that says that Congress with a 3/4 majority, and if they found that the president is morally unfit to govern, and that's the words that they use, then they can impeach the president. That article had been used only once to dismiss a president that clearly had to be dismissed in the 1800s, and yet they applied this to Kuczynski. No? And that was the tweak in the constitution that they used. Everybody was very, very surprised, and Kuczynski essentially had to resign in March of 2018. No? It was the first time this opened a political crisis and a sort of rivalry between different parties in Congress. No, the other sort of factor that sort of fit into this crisis is the characteristic of our political parties. We have very thin political parties. In the past, we had two, three very strong parties. We had the APRA party that probably you know about. It was like the pre-party in Mexico. Then we had the Belaúnde party, the Acción Popular party, also very strong. And then we also had the Communist Party in the 1930s. No? But then at the time of Fujimori, all these parties sort of were dismantled. And we had what I will call empty shelf parties. And the irony is that today we are in the middle of an election and we will see 36 presidential candidates competing in this election. Essentially, you can put together a party if you have a little bit of money, some signatures that support you, and then you will do it. And it has become like a business to essentially take advantage of the state, essentially steal from the state. I believe that the best way to describe this is that we have moved gradually to a sort of parliamentary autocracy. Gradually, the parliament, the Congress, the majorities in Congress have appointed the members of the Tribunal Constitucional, our highest court. Most of them align with their own views. Then they have also dismantled the Attorney General office, and they have gradually, essentially, controlled all of the powers of the state. Our constitution is very clear that it's a constitution that splits power between three powers, the judiciary, the executive, and Congress. Yet that, in a way, has been now controlled by only one political force, that is Congress. The irony of this is that Congress is very unpopular, highly unpopular. The popularity of this Congress is only 2% on the positive side and 98% on the negative side. I think, having said this, I think Coricelli has done, my friend Fabrizio Coricelli has written an interesting article that describes these regimes as the hybrid trap. Essentially, these are parties that are more of sort of cronies that try to penetrate the state to take advantage of either the legislation or essentially to benefit from the state. And that's essentially where we are today. So let me go now to the elections. These are the most recent polls. We have the two front runners are Rafael López Aliaga, a person from the right wing. I will characterize him very, very similar to President Trump in the US. And then we have Keiko Fujimori, that I already explained a little bit. The third position is Carlos Alvarez, another candidate from the right. And only in the fourth place, we have Alfonso López Chao, a sort of, I would say, center left-wing candidate that apparently is being supported by, that's the rumor, by the Mexican government. And our sense is that probably López Aliaga and López Chao are going to be the two that confront themselves in the runoff. But there's a tweak here. And on the right-hand side, you see a chart that tells you the percentage of voters that said that either they don't know who will they vote, or they won't vote for any of the presidential candidates. That percentage today is 42%, which means that anything can happen between now and the election day. With 42%, that means that even a candidate that today has 0% of the vote can become the president. And this is very atypical from previous election, and that's what you see in that chart. No? The Congress is a little bit different. We have an electoral system that has 3 thresholds in order for you to being elected. First, you have to gather at least 5% percentage of the total votes. Second, you have to, or the party has to win 7 seats in the lower house in the Congress and 3 seats in the Senate. This is the first time we're going to have a Senate since the year 2000. Of the 7, 3 have to come from provinces. Of the 3 senators, 1 has to come from the provinces. Our sense, and this is a study that several of the polling companies have done, is that very few parties are going to make it to the Congress and to the Senate. And the 2 that are leading and probably will make it to the Congress and Senate is going to be Fuerza Popular from Keiko Fujimori and Renovación Popular from López Aliaga. So clearly, the next Senate and Congress is going to be in the hands of the right wing. So even if we have a left wing president, he will have a strong opposition from Congress and the Senate. One more point on the Senate. The Senate legislation is also atypical. This Senate is going to be extremely powerful. The Senate, unlike other constitution, does not need to send legislation back for the lower house to approve. They can approve the legislation. In addition, the Senate will decide, will vote on the central bank governor, on the members of the Tribunal Constitucional, our highest court, will have control of the judiciary and also of the Attorney General. One interesting thing is that if we put together this consolidation of parties in the lower house and the Senate, and we assume that the Senate will collect the most senior politicians, that may mean that we will not have that turnover of presidents that we have had, because it will be the Senate, the one that will have to discuss the possible presidential impeachments, and hopefully they will be much more cautious than our lower house have been so far. The economy is doing well. Last year we grew at 3.4%. We revised our forecast from 3.2 to 3.4. For this year, we are expecting 3.2, and 2027, 3.3. So it's an economy that essentially grows at 3%. On the right-hand side, you see the quarterly estimates. Interesting, what we argue is that the second quarter is going to be a weak quarter, assuming that all this political noise is going to essentially slow down or cool down the economy a little bit. Here you have where the sources of growth is coming. Mainly is coming from the private sector. Private consumption and private investments are the anchors of this rapid growth. The government, not so much. And also exports. Exports have been performing much better than expected, even though that we had all the Trump tariffs. And on the sectors, as you can see on the right-hand side, mining has been the driving force, and we have seen that the mining investment has grown at 25% in 2025. No? And here you have investment on the left-hand side that will pass quickly. On the right-hand side, you have the uncertainty and private investment, and you see that there is a correlation. Then we have private investment and mining. This is what I already mentioned. And obviously, what is driving mining is our terms of trade. We are producers of silver that has grown at 160%, gold 69%, and copper 39%. So most of the growth is coming from abroad. No? And I will pass these slides. I'm sure that Alex will distribute this. Let's go now to fiscal. It is true that we have been lucky on the fiscal side. The fiscal deficit has been low. Under MEF fiscal rules, the government has complied with 2 out of the 4 targets. The 2 is the fiscal deficit and the debt to GDP ratio. But there is another 2 that they have not complied with. One is that we have a current expenditure excluding maintenance target. The target called for 2.1, it grew at 4.8. And the reason is that the government consistently have been increasing the compensation of civil servants. And then on the right-hand side, we have the non-financial expenditure that the target called for 0.7 and it grew at 2.8. Essentially, we're having a fiscal policy that tilts towards current expenditure and sacrifices investment expenditure. No? Now, looking ahead, the key question is, will the government be able to sustain this anchor? And the answer is a big question mark. The Congress has approved legislation that again increases wages, salaries, and compensations to the civil servants, and that amounts to 1 percentage point of GDP in 2026. The fiscal target is 1.8, and if you can see on the right-hand side, the deficit 2026, according to us, will be around 3.4. To that, you have to add some military expenses. We are purchasing a few airplanes from the US, $3.5 billion, and then the US is also financing a new naval base in El Callao, another $1.5 billion. So if you add everything, we could be reaching close to 4% of GDP in fiscal deficit in 2026. No? Is there a divide between politics and the economy? The answer is yes, but there are 2 things that I think we have to be careful. One is that we are a lucky country, and we have had very strong tailwinds from the global economy. On the left-hand side, you see the real GDP and the terms of trade. And we had the best terms of trade since the time of the Second World War, when we have similar terms of trade. When we had these terms of trade, we had been growing at 6 or 7%. Today, we're growing at 3%. The second is that if you look at long-term averages, which we see on the right-hand side, what you see is that there has been a slowdown in the economy. And the slowdown coincides very well with the times of economic populism that has been implemented. And that economic populism coincides very well with the political crisis that starts in late 2016. But if we move a little bit deeper and we essentially look at potential growth rate, the potential growth rate has been coming down. Between 2002 and 2008, we have a potential growth rate of 6%. Today, that rate is 2.3. Total factor productivity was 3.7 in the early 2000s. Today is negative. And that is part of the counter-reform that we have seen. It's interesting to compare Argentina and Peru. And here we use per capita income relatively to the US in both cases. And what you see is that in Argentina, once the Peron Constitution was enacted in 1949, that essentially removed the rule of law from the Constitution, the economy started going down. In Peru, just the opposite. In 1993 is the first time that we introduced the concept of rule of law in the Constitution, protected property rights, give a very clear mandate to the public sector, etc., as we'll see later, and that led to growth. In our view, one of the key factors behind this resilience of the economy is that Constitution. And here is the main, I mark it in yellow, the main changes in the Constitution. First is the role of a state. It clearly defines the state and essentially curbs any enactment of public enterprises. If you want to statize or essentially take over a firm, you have to go to Congress and approve it there. The second is the rule of law. Our contracts are law immediately, and they cannot be reversed by a court. They become a law, and it's only the Congress that can revert them. Then foreign and domestic investment are treated equally. Then we have the protection of property rights. Article 79, very important. This Congress has not obeyed that article, but that article says that only the executive can pass legislation that has expenditure components. What that means is that the fiscal stringency goes back to the Constitution. And finally, the protection of the central bank. The central bank is completely autonomous. The central bank cannot finance the deficit, cannot buy government bonds, and probably is one of the most autonomous central banks that I've seen. But despite all this, what we have seen, and despite the rapid acceleration in investment, what we have seen is that if we look at investment as a ratio of GDP, then investment has been coming down. And I will argue that that has to do with the fact that we have had so many arbitrages. Essentially, this is a lack of compliance on the legislation by the government. And on the right-hand side, you see the arbitrations. No? And we also have gone back in terms of the reforms. Let's go into the final point, the central bank. The central bank has been very successful. It has kept inflation very low, lower than the US. Recently, it has gone a little bit up in the reading that came out over the weekend, but it's 2%. And it's very difficult for a central bank in emerging market to have a 2% inflation, yet this bank has had that. But the central bank has sort of fallen into a dilemma. It has had very low inflation, yet recently it has been very reluctant to lower interest rates. And it has engaged in FX intervention. In the past, it used the derivative market, which is what you see on the left-hand side, as their main instrument for intervention. But most recently, it has put aside the derivative market and it has intervened in the cash market. I think that has helped the central bank because it has reduced the volatility of the exchange rate. On the left-hand side, you see the interventions and the bid-ask spread on the exchange rate. And what you can see is that that bid-ask spread has sort of collapsed, meaning that the FX market has increased its liquidity. And something similar you see on the right-hand side. Yet that intervention has had its side effects. Any economist will have adverted that. Base money has been increasing. Then the central bank has been relying a lot on short-term debt, and short-term interest rates have gone up. Our sense is that after the election, once the central bank sees that they don't need to keep a tight monetary policy to offset the political volatility, they will engage into a cycle of interest rate cuts. And that's it. And now I can have all the questions from Alex and his team. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you very much, Alfredo. And If any participant want to send their questions through the chat, please start sending them, and I'll read them to Alfredo. Maybe while you send your questions, a couple of issues, Alfredo. I mean, if I understood you correctly, you're kind of hopeful that the introduction of the Senate might bring back some more rational politics into Peru, and maybe it will become a force to have a more orderly and maybe go back to a bi-party or tri-party political system? Or I understood incorrectly, and you think this political volatility, etc., will continue? That would be one question that I think it's at the core of thinking that maybe this decoupling between politics and economics will get fixed by fixing the politics, hopefully, and and the other side of that question will be, if this is not the case and politics continue to be so volatile, do you think the economy will continue to resist or not?
Very interesting question, both of them. Yes, you have captured correctly. I don't know if this is my hope, but certainly this is probably the only way that this can be corrected. I, I believe, and from looking at the different parties' Senate list, that yes, that the most senior politicians are trying to get into the Senate. And my sense is that those politicians are going to be more serious and more careful about this. The other interesting thing is that I didn't say, but the Senate is split in two. The Senate will have 60 members. 30 of those members are going to be elected on a single district. That means nationwide, like the president, and the other 30 are going to come from the local states. So that means that this concept of unity that we have in the Constitution is going to partially be prevailed in the Senate. That is not, we will not have that extreme pressure coming from the provinces, which is the case now of the lower house. Yes, I think that's now, if that doesn't happen, I think the risk is that we end up like Venezuela, like Cuba, or like I would say an hybrid state, where I think these sort of mafias that today are in the parties, or these cronies that are in the parties and they are trying to essentially steal from the states, are going to want to be the ones that will prevail. We have, for instance, to give you an example, I won't mention the party, but there is a party that out of the 130 candidates to the lower house, 65 have judiciary problems, no? And that's really serious, yes.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. I mean, before we turn to the audience questions that now they're coming in very quickly, one issue that I mean, it's challenging a lot of Latin American countries today is how to address the geopolitical tensions that are taking place. And obviously, in the case of Latin America and in the case of Peru, those have been concentrated, or at least from the outside, on issues associated with the port of Chancay. But to what extent, I mean, these tensions between China and the US might come to the center of Peruvian diplomacy in the future, and how is Peru dealing with them, or is going to deal with them? As we have seen, I mean, these tensions arise in other countries in the last 12 months.
Peru's governments have been very pragmatical on this. In November of last year, when the Chancay port was inaugurated and President Xi Jinping came to Peru, that government, that was Dina Boluarte, she was very much a pro-China government. and obviously wanted to give everything to China. She was sort of a leftist in disguise. But since then, things have changed, and now we have become a very Trump lover government. No, I think the U.S. has cleverly moved. They first they are financing a naval base in Callao, only 60 kilometers away from the Chancay port. No, and they are putting 1.5 billion dollars there, and they are going to provide all sorts of armament to the navals in Peru. Then there is a rumor that the airplanes that we were going to buy, at the beginning we were going to buy them from Sweden, then from the French. Now we're going to buy from the Americans. No, and then I don't know if you know about this, but the U.S. have promoted Peru to be an observer at NATO, not a non-belligerent, meaning that we have become like a preferred nation for the U.S. And that means that we are sort of gradually putting aside the Chancay port. Now, let me give you a few statistics on the Chancay. When you look at all the ports that we are going to have and are going to be inaugurated soon, we will have around 20 ports, of which 8 will be new. Of the 8, 3 of them have U.S. investment, one type of another. 2 have China investment. But if you look at how many containers are going to move, the number of containers is going to increase from around 2.5 million to 7 million. No, that's the total containers that these ports are going to move. Chancay is going to account only for 1.3. The other ports, mainly having the U.S. investments, are going to have most of the others. So my sense is that it is true that we are seeing a lot of Chinese investment, but I don't think we are going to become a China satellite anytime soon. No?
Perfect. No. Thanks, Alfredo. Let me read you 2 of the questions, and then we go to other 2, and we do it this way. The first question from Michelle Chadwin: do you see some constitutional changes coming to make it harder to impeach presidents in the future? And the second question by Luigi Butron Calderon: dear Alfredo, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. If I understood correctly, the answer would be no. No, there is no cuerdas separadas or separate tracks between politics and economics. We often assume that because the country has maintained macro stability. However, development is much more than macro stability. One could argue that the real cause of political instability lies in the foregone opportunity to advance medium-term structural reforms, etc. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on this.
On the first one, several parties have tried to change that article in the Constitution, the one that says that if the president is morally unfit, he can be impeached. But I think it's very difficult to gather the 2/3 majority in order to change that article. No, it is true that the radical left, wants to change the Constitution, but today, and as probably you've seen in that table, the radical left does not appear even in the polls with 1%. It is the center-left parties, the ones that have more popularity. So I hope that we are not going to have a change in the Constitution as Bolivia or Venezuela had. And clearly, if we have a constitutional change, that would be a big risk for Peru, as probably it comes across from my presentation. The other is difficult. I think you can argue that there are no cuerdas separadas. It's true if you look at long term. Obviously, if we think that this economy, the long-term growth, is driven by reforms, by structural reforms, then there is no cuerdas separadas. But clearly, in the short term, the cyclical growth is giving us such strong growth in the short term that appears as if we have cuerdas separadas, in the sense that we have high cyclical growth, probably not much structural growth, but and in the middle of a political crisis. It is interesting to note, but I don't recall that we have had any other previous election with such a financial stability that we have had so far. Our currency has appreciated 10% last year against the US dollar. Our balance of payment has a surplus of around 2% of GDP, and we have become exporters of capital to the rest of the world. All this is very ironically in the middle of an election process as the one that we are seeing today. No?
Yeah, no. The other two questions have to do with the central bank. Do you see any major political actor who could threaten the independence of the central bank or might threaten the property rights established in the 93 Constitution by Gabriel McKern? And then an anonymous question, how do you think the departure of Julio Velarde will impact Peru's monetary policy, if at all?
Well, the story of the central bank and essentially taking advantage of the huge international reserves that we have. We have $90 billion in reserves. This is, I don't know, this is like 3 times base money. It's huge, no? But part of the story is that not all of the international reserves pertain to the central bank. Of the 90 billion, around 60 are owned by the central bank. The other 30 is essentially the deposits in dollars at the banks that they have to comply with the encaje, and then is the government. Most of the deposits in dollars of the government are at the central bank. No, there are more than one presidential candidate that have said that they want to take those $90 billion reserves and do a stimulus program to help the poor, etc., etc. I don't think they realize that if they want to use those dollars, the central bank at some point will have to go and sell the dollars in the market, and that has a lot of repercussions in terms of monetary policy. My sense is that only the very radical left are saying that. I will say those of the center right are essentially treating the central bank as completely independent. Lopez Chao is one of the persons that says that he wants to use the international reserves, and he has some popularity. But I think it's difficult that they will do that. The second question, remind me, was about...
how do you think the departure of Julio Velarde will impact Peru's monetary policy? Do you think that might happen with a new president, or then an open-ended question eventually will happen, and when it happens, do you think it's going to have an impact or not?
Strictly, Julio's mandate expires on September of this year, 2026. And at that time, the president will have to submit first, propose one name for the central bank governor and 3 names for the members of the board. And in addition, the Senate will have to add 3 more members. Julio Velarde have said very clearly that he's not in a rush to leave, that if the government wants to have more time, that he will stay the time that the new president needs in order to appoint a new central bank governor. I think Julio has been an anchor, I would say a critical person in transforming the central bank. The central bank is the only government agency that is fully meritocratic. And I think we have to give a lot of credit to the institutional development that has taken place in that central bank. So my sense is that if a reasonable economist comes and takes the job of Julio, the institution will do the rest and probably is going to be okay. and we have very good economies that can become central bank governors in the future. No?
Definitely. And I guess, I mean, at the end of the day, the strength of the institution would be to survive the person that created the institution, no? Because if it's
Correct.
not, it will not be, it will really undermine the definition of institutional strength, no? So eventually, it's very good that Julio, it's open to help have a smooth transition, but then eventually this transition, political transition, and then one transition at the central bank to have the change of command and to see that the institution it's bigger than the person, and hopefully that will be accomplished in Peru, and that will continue to contribute to stability of the economy in Peru. No, so a couple of questions on politics. One is, can we expect the current authorities to remain in office until the elections, or shall we anticipate potential changes in the interim? And the other one is, and you talked a little bit about this in your presentation, how good are the chances that Keiko Fujimori could be elected president? If she's elected, what would be the effects on politics and the economy?
Okay. On the first one, I don't know. We sort of pray every night in order to see this president handing over the government to a new president in July 2026. I think, look, given what I said and given the constitution, given the fact that the Congress is controlled by a block of right-wing parties, and that essentially this president doesn't have much time, and that he even went to try to convince De Soto to be his prime minister, which is of the opposite political wing that where he is. My sense is that we won't see much turbulence. What we will see is probably a few hits here and there, but I don't think that it is possible to change the course and influence the elections of April 12th. I think we are very close to those elections. Our authorities, our electoral authorities are highly independent, very professionals, and essentially the government has nothing to do in the election whatsoever. So I think it's in automatic already, no? I hope we don't have any crisis between now and then, no? And I don't see, to be honest with you, Congress impeaching Balcázar. There is Renovación Popular have said that they will not vote for the prime minister on the non-confidence vote. That, but I think she will have the support in mid-March, no? The other question on Keiko is difficult to say. I think clearly Keiko and López Aliaga are competing one-on-one. The success of López Aliaga is, in my sense, the concerns the population have on Keiko. Otherwise, they would be voting for her. For instance, López Aliaga has gained a lot in the north of the country that is typically Keiko's stronghold. He has also won a lot of space in the south that typically is from the left. But in the event that she is elected, my sense is that she's not going to have control of Congress. She will have opposition, and hopefully she will try to do a good government. Now, what the story tells us is that in a runoff, whoever goes into the runoff against Keiko wins. And that is like a curse in Peru, no? A curse for her. So I don't know. I don't want to make too much there, but we all prefer Keiko not to win, to be honest with you. No?
Well, Alfredo, thank you very much. Maybe a final question. I mean, going back to your presentation, I mean, you define in one chart the beginning of the populist period.
Mhm.
I think 2017, something like that, and the economy is
Mhm,
slowing down towards 3%. This is, let's call it a weird populism because it also coincides with what you call parliamentary autocracy. No, we kind of associate populism with these strong leaders or
mhm,
charismatic anti-establishment leaders, and not kind of a fragmented. So these are populist policies implemented by a fragmented power, something
mhm,
like that. But my question was more along the lines that at some time that it's similar to 2017 also, Peru kind of stopped having major mining projects
mhm,
coming into operation, no? So the mining
mhm,
sector kind of in terms of output, not
mhm.
prices, stop being a driving force of development. Is that changing or not? The slowdown has to do more with the slowdown in mining output or bad politics. No, so those are a couple of questions to round up the discussion.
Um, let's take first the mining. I think the mining is huge. I think the number of projects that we have in the pipeline is like $70 billion on projects. No, there is one project in the north of Peru, which is called La Granja, that is being explored by Rio Tinto and First Quantum. That if that project works out, that will be 800,000 tons of copper.
Mm.
Our largest copper mine produces 350. And if you put all of these copper projects together, we will essentially beat Chile as being the first copper exporter. The other thing that is interesting is that the mines are in the states, regionally, in the local areas, not in Lima. So if we are clever as policymakers, we can use that wealth generation to essentially help the communities and induce a development of the country. The problem is politics, is that politics does not allow us to essentially extract that mineral and use it in the benefit of the population. And that's, I would say, that's the circle that we have to square as a country, no? And today what we have is we have a lot of illegal mines. For instance, of the $24 billion of gold exports, 12 come from illegal miners. Uh, my sense, I will try to look at it in the positive terms. I think it is not difficult to simplify the process of approval of new mines and formalize the mines and actually use that money to benefit the low income population. That's something that other countries does not have. No? Now, on the parliamentary autocracy, I've been reading a lot about this, and there is a concept called anocracies. Anocracies is hybrid regimes that are not autocracy, but are not a fully democracy either. No, there is this paper by Coricelli that I like a lot, and the interesting thing is that they say that these anocracies can survive many years, and actually the only thing that they need is to distribute the rent among the small parties that become the members of these anocracies. No, so meaning, and this is what we are seeing in Peru. We are seeing that the parties that today in Congress are taking advantage of these resources and actually distribute it among themselves instead of benefiting the population at large. But we clearly have to break with that.
Yeah. No, no, thanks. And I mean, I guess that you also think from the things that you've said that if congressional or parliamentary politics improves, you don't impeach the next president and the next president is able, maybe that better governance could lead to a situation in which Peru will be able to unlock this new round of mining potential, or that it's another sort of problem that has more to do with the federation versus local communities, etc.? Or do you think a better working government will be able to solve that, and therefore you might have a very important decade of development in Peru on the back of this mining wealth that can be unlocked?
I think the way I try to explain this is, despite we have gone through Castillo, that was a person that wanted to take us to Venezuela or to Cuba, the interesting thing about Peru is that thanks to this constitution that we have, and actually Castillo at the end didn't want to change that constitution, which was interesting, no? But the interesting thing is that our private sector is intact. There has been no statizations. We only have one problem company, which is Petroperu, that hopefully we will deal with that. But there's no more statization of companies. For instance, Repsol had a big leakage in the north of Peru. Castillo was a president. He could have taken over Repsol, and he didn't, no? Which was very interesting. My sense is that the private sector is highly resilient, highly competitive, and I think they will deal and they will do what they need to do in order to generate more wealth. The problem is the government. The government is destroyed. Essentially, all the parties have filtered individuals into different positions of the government. There is no meritocracy. The civil servants have increased their own salaries. So it's a little bit of a mess. So if we pass, for instance, a civil service law similar to the one that the US have, we will have solved around 50% of our problems.
Well, again, Alfredo, thank you very much for making yourself available last Monday, but because of the snow, we couldn't make it in person. But again, offering us to have this Zoom conversation. We will be watching closely the election on April 12th, and if needed, on the second round in June. And we hope to have you back in person maybe in the second half of this year to discuss the prospects of Peru's democracy and Peru's economy with the new government in place. Thank you very much. And thanks
Thank you,
everyone.
Alex. Thank you, Alex, and thank you all of you that have managed to join us. And I'm sorry for not arriving in person on Monday, but yes, I hope that after the election we'll have an opportunity to discuss in person. Thank you very much for